kitchen light flickered once, a quick, almost imperceptible stutter, as Elliot Graves reached for his coffee mug. His fingers paused mid-air. Something was different, not wrong, necessarily, just off. The sugar jar had been moved, maybe half an inch to the left of where he always kept it. Always, because Elliot Graves was a man of unbending routines, the kind that slowly calcify around a life until they become indistinguishable from the life itself. That's when he saw a small folded piece of paper tucked partially beneath the sugar jar, cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind people use for wedding invitations or formal correspondence, not notes left in empty apartments. Elliot lived alone, had for years. He picked up the paper with the careful hesitation of someone touching something that shouldn't exist, unfolded it once. 5 words in careful block letters stared back at him. "It's not where you left it." Elliot's life had acquired a comforting predictability that most would find stifling. At 39, he worked remotely as a UX designer from his mid-sized apartment on the quieter edges of Portland. His daily ritual never varied. Wake at 6:15, shower for exactly 7 minutes, dress in one of his 5 rotating outfits, walk 3 blocks to Westside Coffee, order a medium Americano with room for cream, which he never added, return home, work until precisely 6 p.m., heat up leftovers or order delivery from the same 3 restaurants, watch 2 hours of television with the sound barely audible, then sleep. Weekends were for grocery shopping and laundry. The variation came only in which streaming service algorithm he'd surrender to each night. He stood in his kitchen now, holding the note, feeling the weight of the paper between his fingers. The handwriting wasn't his. He knew that immediately. His own script was loose and slanted, the product of years of rushing through design notes. This was meticulously printed, each letter equally spaced and perfectly formed. "It's not where you left it." What wasn't? The sugar jar. He glanced around his apartment. Everything else seemed untouched. No drawers hanging open, no electronics. Missing, nothing disturbed in the meticulous order of his living space. Maybe it was a joke, but who would leave it? He rarely had visitors. The landlord had been by last month to check a leaking faucet, but that had been scheduled and supervised. Elliot hadn't given his spare key to anyone, not even his sister in Baltimore, whom he spoke to every other Sunday for exactly 27 minutes. He turned the paper over, nothing on the back. He held it up to the light, just plain expensive stationery. After examining it for nearly 10 minutes, Elliot crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. Probably just a strange mistake. Maybe he'd written it himself during a late-night work session and forgotten. People forget things, especially when every day is a carbon copy of the one before it. Elliot completed his work tasks that day with unusual difficulty. His mind kept drifting back to the note. By evening, he'd almost convinced himself it was nothing worth dwelling on, just one of those inexplicable moments that occasionally interrupt the steady flow of ordinary life. Until the next morning. Friday dawned grey and drizzling, a typical Portland spring day. Elliot went through his morning routine on autopilot until he entered the kitchen. There, under the sugar jar, was another note. Same cream-colored paper, same fold, same position. He was certain he'd thrown the first one away. He crossed to the trash bin and checked. Yes, there was the crumpled ball of paper he'd discarded yesterday. With a trembling hand, he picked up the new note and unfolded it. "It's not where you left it." Identical block letters, perfect spacing, exactly the same message. This time he photographed the note before throwing it away. Then he checked his doors and windows, all locked from the inside, no signs of forced entry. He even checked the balcony door, which he rarely opened except during the 3 weeks of summer when Portland temperatures demanded it. Nothing, no explanation. He considered calling someone, the building manager maybe, or even the police. But what would he say? "Someone is leaving me cryptic notes that don't threaten me in any way." They'd think he was paranoid or attention-seeking. That night, Elliot placed a small piece of clear tape across the bottom of his front door. If anyone came in, the tape would break. He did the same with the balcony door. Then he meticulously arranged small, inconspicuous objects throughout his apartment. A pen lying at a specific angle on his desk, a book slightly jutting from his shelf, a pair of shoes with the left one untied. He took photos of each setup with his phone. He slept poorly, waking at every small noise, the refrigerator cycling on, a car passing on the street below, the building settling. Saturday morning. The tape on both doors was intact. Every object remained precisely where he'd left it. With growing dread, Elliot walked to the kitchen. There it was. A third note. Same paper, same message, same position under the sugar jar. The rational part of Elliot's mind fought desperately for an explanation. Maybe he was sleepwalking. Maybe he had a carbon monoxide leak affecting his memory. Or maybe someone had a key to his apartment. The landlord, maintenance, a previous tenant who never returned their copy. But none of these explanations accounted for how the intruder managed to leave no trace besides the note. How they knew to place it in the exact same spot 3 days in a row. How they could enter without disturbing anything else. By midday, Elliot had purchased a small webcam. He positioned it on a bookshelf with a clear view of the kitchen counter and sugar jar. The camera would upload footage directly to cloud storage, triggered by any movement. He felt a grim satisfaction at having taken action, at applying logic to an illogical situation. That evening, as he microwaved leftover pad thai, Elliot noticed his neighbor Simone in the hallway, collecting her mail. Simone was in her early 50s, a copy editor who worked from home like him. She walked with a slight limp and used a cane, the result of a car accident years ago, she'd once mentioned. Their interactions were typically limited to polite nods and occasional small talk about the weather or building maintenance. "Evening, Elliot," she said, tucking a bundle of envelopes under her arm. "You're looking a bit worn down. Everything all right?" "Just work," he lied. "Tight deadlines." Simone studied him with the careful attention of someone who edits text for a living. "If you say so, but maybe get some rest this weekend? You look like you haven't slept in days." "I'll try," he said, then hesitating. "Simone, have you noticed anything strange in the building lately? Any unusual people hanging around?" She frowned slightly. "Can't say that I have, but then again, I'm not the most observant neighbor. Between my work and this bad hip, I don't get out much. And I sleep with a white noise machine, completely dead to the world once I'm out." "Right. Just curious," Elliot said, forcing a smile. Back in his apartment, Elliot obsessively checked the webcam feed on his phone. Nothing unusual happened that evening, just the occasional blur of his own movement as he prepared for bed. That. Tight. He lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Around 1 a.m. he got up and retrieved a box of old photographs from his bedroom closet. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, perhaps some forgotten clue to his own past, some explanation for what was happening. Most of the photos were predictable. Family gatherings, college graduation, a handful of ex-girlfriends from relationships that had quietly faded rather than dramatically ended. But as he flipped through them, one image caught his attention. It showed his kitchen table, the same one he had now, with the sugar jar in its familiar position. And beneath it, there appeared to be a folded piece of paper. The photo was dated 6 years ago. The timestamp printed in the bottom right corner. Elliot couldn't remember taking it. In fact, he couldn't remember why he would have photographed his kitchen table at all. The paper in the image was blurry, its contents unreadable, but it was folded exactly the same way as the notes he'd been finding, placed in the exact same spot. A cold sensation spread through Elliot's chest. 6 years ago, before he'd settled into his current routines, before his life had narrowed to its present parameters. He'd been different then, more social, less rigid. He'd dated occasionally, had friends over for dinner, even traveled a bit. When had that changed? And why couldn't he pinpoint the moment when his life had contracted to its current dimensions? Elliot didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, he began documenting everything. He created a spreadsheet with times, dates, and observations. He took more photographs of his apartment, focusing on details he normally overlooked. He wrote notes to himself and taped them around his living space. Wednesday, blue mug. No guests since March. You're alone here. His sense of time began to distort. Had the notes started appearing on Thursday or was it Wednesday? He checked his work emails to confirm the dates, but even they seemed unreliable suddenly. Had he really been working on the Brennan project for 2 weeks? Or was it 3? He tried emailing his landlord about getting the locks changed, but received no response. The last communication he'd had from the property management company was 2 weeks ago. A generic message about quarterly maintenance inspections. Reading it again, Elliot noticed something odd. Parts of it seemed like template text that hadn't been properly edited. Your unit APT number will be accessed between the hours of time window. As if someone had hastily copied and pasted without. Filling in the specifics. Sunday morning, the 4th day. Elliot approached the kitchen with dread, his phone ready to document whatever new note awaited him. But there was no note. Instead, the sugar jar itself was missing. Elliot froze, staring at the empty space where it had sat for years. There was a faint circle on the wood, a slightly lighter tone in the grain marking where the jar had protected the surface from sunlight and air. He searched the entire apartment frantically. Every cabinet, every drawer, under the bed, even the trash. The jar was simply gone. With shaking hands, Elliot checked the webcam footage from overnight. The video played normally until 2:41 a.m., when the image became distorted with static. The glitch lasted exactly 3 minutes. At 2:44 a.m., the video cleared, and the sugar jar was gone. No movement, no shadows, just absence. He replayed the footage multiple times, slowing it down, zooming in, searching for any clue. Nothing. Just 3 minutes of visual noise at precisely the time when the jar disappeared. Elliot returned to the box of photographs, wanting to look again at the image of his kitchen table from 6 years ago. But it too was missing. In its place was another photograph he didn't recognize, a close-up of his apartment door, taken from inside, with the peephole centered in the frame. The door was closed. The photo was recent. He could tell from the small scratch near the doorknob that had happened last winter when he'd struggled with grocery bags, but he hadn't taken the picture. Elliot printed screenshots of his webcam feed, especially the moments before and after the glitch window. He laid them side by side on his desk, studying them with the intensity of a detective at a crime scene. In the frame from 2:40 a.m., everything was normal. By 2:45 a.m., the sugar jar was gone. There was no transition, no explanation for the disappearance. A knock at his door startled him so badly that he knocked over his coffee mug, spilling liquid across the printouts. Cursing, he grabbed a towel and mopped up the mess, then approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, he saw Simone leaning on her cane and holding something in her free hand. Elliot considered pretending he wasn't home, but Simone knocked again, more insistently this time. Reluctantly, he opened the door. "Sorry to bother you on a Sunday," Simone said, "but I found something strange." She held out her hand. In it was a folded piece of cream-colored paper. "It was under my teapot this morning. I thought maybe it was meant for you." Elliot took the paper, already knowing what it would say. He unfolded it slowly. "It's not where you left it." "Do you know anything about it?" Simone asked, watching his face carefully. "Why would you think it was meant for me?" Elliot asked, his voice barely audible. Simone shrugged. "Just a feeling. You seemed off the other day when you asked about strange things in the building. And..." She hesitated. "I heard noises from your apartment last night, around 2:30 or... so I thought maybe you had a guest over." "I didn't," Elliot said quickly. "I was alone, all night." "If you say so," Simone replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "Anyway, I should get back to work. Let me know if you figure out what that note's about." After she left, Elliot sat on his couch staring at the note she'd given him. It was identical to the others. Same paper, same message, same handwriting. But it had been found in Simone's apartment, not his. The implications were dizzying. If the notes weren't specifically targeted at him, what did they mean? And why had they stopped appearing in his apartment the same day one appeared in Simone's? Was someone moving through the building, leaving cryptic messages for different residents? That night, Elliot didn't bother setting up traps or markers. Instead, he positioned himself directly in front of his computer, watching the webcam feed in real time. He made coffee to stay awake, his eyes never leaving the screen. At exactly 2:41 a.m., the image began to distort. Static. Then blackness. Elliot leaned forward, staring intently. For a moment, just a few frames, something appeared in the glitching footage. A silhouette standing at the kitchen counter facing the camera, one hand resting exactly where the sugar jar used to be. Elliot froze the video, his heart hammering in his chest. He zoomed in, adjusting the brightness and contrast. The figure had his posture, his hair, his clothes, the same faded Portland Trail Blazers t-shirt he'd been wearing all day. But the face was turned away, just slightly, making it impossible to confirm it was him. Elliot replayed those few frames, over and over, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Was it him? Had he been sleepwalking? But how could he be in front of the computer and in the kitchen simultaneously? Eventually, the first grey light of dawn began to filter through his blinds. Exhausted, Elliot pushed himself away from the computer and stumbled to the kitchen for more coffee. That's when he saw it. The sugar jar was back, sitting in its usual spot as if it had never been gone. The note was missing. Elliot didn't tell anyone. Who would believe him? Instead, he made coffee with trembling hands and stared out the window at the morning traffic below. The sunlight felt artificial somehow, too bright and too yellow. He moved through his apartment, checking everything. Every object was exactly where it should be. Nothing missing, nothing added. Except one thing, the frame of his bathroom mirror was now slightly tilted, just a few degrees off level. He wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't been scrutinizing every detail of his surroundings. Elliot stood before the mirror, studying his reflection. His face looked gaunt, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. He leaned closer, adjusting the frame to make it level again. And that's when he saw it. Just for a second, in the reflection, a piece of paper taped to the inside of his bathroom cabinet door. Visible only from this specific angle, with the mirror tilted exactly as it had been. Slowly, he opened the cabinet. There it was, a cream-colored note, folded once, taped precisely in the center of the door. He stared at it, not touching it. Not yet, because he knew. Somehow he knew that whatever was written on this note would change everything. That once he read it, there would be no going back to the comfort of his routines, to the carefully constructed predictability of his days. Time seemed to slow as he reached for the paper, his fingers peeling away the tape. With meticulous care, the note came free easily, as if it had been waiting for him all along. Elliot unfolded it once. The handwriting was the same perfect block letters, but the message was different. "You are not where you left yourself." Elliot stared at the words, reading them over and over. "You are not where you left yourself." Unlike the previous messages, this one felt personal, directed specifically at him, not just a generic puzzle. The words seemed to pulse on the page, growing more unsettling with each reading. He carefully refolded the note and placed it in his pocket. Then he did something he hadn't done in months. He called in sick to work. His email to his project manager was brief and vague. Family emergency. Would make up the hours over the weekend. No questions asked. Elliot had never missed a deadline in 3 years. He spent the morning searching his apartment again, this time looking not for intruders but for clues about himself. The box of photographs became his focus. He examined each image carefully, noting dates, locations, who was present. When organized, chronologically, a pattern emerged that he hadn't noticed before. 6 years ago, his life had been different. The photos showed Elliot at parties, hiking trips, dinners with friends. There was a woman who appeared in many of them, Sarah, his last serious girlfriend. Her face brought back a flood of memories. Their meeting at a design conference, weekend, trips to the coast, arguments over trivial things that seemed important at the time. Their relationship had ended. When? Elliot struggled to remember the specific moment. It had just faded somehow. After Sarah, the photos became increasingly sparse. Fewer people, fewer outings, more images of empty spaces, his apartment, neighborhood streets, the view from his window, as if the photographer, himself presumably, had gradually lost interest in human subjects. And then there was the unexplained photo of his kitchen table with what appeared to be a note under the sugar jar. And now the new one of his front door from the inside. Elliot hadn't realized how methodically he'd been documenting his own withdrawal from the world. It wasn't a sudden break, but a slow retreat, like a tide going out so gradually that you don't notice until the water is a distant line on the horizon. He checked his phone. Almost no recent calls except to his sister, food delivery, and occasional work conferences. His text messages were similarly sparse. When had he last had a conversation that wasn't transactional or obligatory? Around noon, Elliot heard a knock at his door. Through the peephole, he saw Simone again. This time, he opened the door immediately. "I brought you some tea," she said, holding out a steaming mug. "You look like you could use it." "How did you know I was home?" Elliot asked, accepting the mug cautiously. "I heard you moving around. These walls aren't as thick as the landlord claims." She glanced past him into the apartment. "Everything okay? You seemed pretty shaken yesterday." Elliot hesitated. Part of him, the part that had been living in isolation for years, wanted to thank her politely and close the door. But another part, a part that felt like it was awakening from a long sleep, wanted to let someone in, to share the strangeness that had invaded his life. Actually, no. Everything's not okay. He stepped back from the doorway. "Would you like to come in?" Simone looked surprised but nodded. She entered his apartment with the careful movements of someone navigating unfamiliar territory, her cane making soft thumps on the hardwood floor. "I haven't had visitors in a while," Elliot admitted, hastily clearing some papers from the couch. "I can tell," Simone said, but there was no judgment in her tone. She lowered herself onto the couch, propping her cane against the armrest. "So what's going on? Does it have something to do with that strange note I found?" Elliot sat across from her, clutching the mug of tea. "It's complicated, and honestly, it's going to sound crazy. Try me. I edit murder mysteries for a living, so I have a high tolerance for the bizarre." So Elliot told her everything. The original notes under the sugar jar, the missing jar that reappeared, the webcam glitches, the old photograph he'd found and then lost, the new note in his medicine cabinet. As he spoke, he realized how unhinged it all sounded, like the ravings of a man on the edge of a breakdown. But Simone listened attentively, her expression thoughtful, rather than skeptical. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Can I see the notes?" she finally asked. "I only have the latest one," Elliot said, retrieving it from his pocket. "I threw the others away." Simone examined the note carefully, running her fingers over the paper. "Expensive stationery, and the handwriting is interesting, very controlled, almost mechanical." She handed it back to him. "And you're sure no one else has access to your apartment?" "Positive. I've checked everything. The locks, the windows, even the vents. Nothing's disturbed except for these notes appearing and disappearing." "And what about the webcam footage? The figure you saw, you said it looked like you?" Elliot nodded. "Same clothes, same build, but the face was turned away." "Show me," she said. He retrieved his laptop and pulled up the saved video file, forwarding to the crucial frames. Simone leaned in, studying the screen intently. "That's definitely weird," she said after a moment. "But you know what's weirder? Look at the timestamp." Elliot looked where she was pointing. The video showed 2:41 a.m., which matched what he remembered. But then Simone reached for her phone and showed him the date. "That's not possible," Elliot said, staring at her phone. "That would mean this footage is from 3 days from now," Simone finished. "Tuesday night, not last night." Elliot felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. "That can't be right. I recorded this last night. I watched it happen in real time. Well, either your webcam software is glitching with the date, or..." She left the alternative hanging in the air, unspoken. "Or what? Time isn't working properly?" "That's impossible," Simone shrugged. "I'm just pointing out what I see, and what I see is a timestamp from the future on your video." Elliot closed the laptop, his mind racing. "This doesn't make any sense." "No, it doesn't," Simone agreed. "But I think we need to consider the possibility that whatever's happening here goes beyond someone breaking into your apartment." She hesitated, then asked, "The message in the new note, what did it say?" "You are not where you left yourself," Elliot quoted. "And what do you think that means?" Elliot shook his head. "I don't know, but it feels personal. Like someone or something knows more about me than I do. Or maybe it's you," Simone suggested gently. "Maybe some part of you is trying to communicate with the rest of you." "That's absurd," Elliot said, but without conviction. "You think I'm leaving notes for myself and then forgetting about it?" "I think," Simone said carefully, "that people are capable of compartmentalizing in extreme ways when under stress. And from what you've told me, and what I've observed as your neighbor, you've been living a very isolated, rigid life. That kind of existence can sometimes cause fractures in how we experience ourselves. You think I'm having some kind of dissociative episode? I'm not a psychiatrist, Elliot. I'm just saying that sometimes our minds find unusual ways to tell us when something's wrong." Elliot wanted to dismiss her theory, but it resonated with a fear that had been growing in him since the notes began appearing. Not a fear of external threat, but of internal disintegration, of losing touch with himself. "So what do I do?" he asked, suddenly feeling very tired. "First, I think you should see a doctor," Simone said. "Rule out any physical causes, carbon monoxide, gas leak, neurological issues. Then maybe talk to a therapist. And in the meantime, just keep waiting for more cryptic notes to appear." "No," Simone said firmly. "In the meantime, you break your routine drastically. If part of you is trying to send a message that you're stuck in patterns that aren't healthy, then disrupt those patterns. Go somewhere you haven't been in years. Call an old friend. Do something spontaneous." The suggestion filled Elliot with a nameless dread. The thought of deviating from his carefully structured days felt almost physically painful. But he also recognized the wisdom in her words. "Will you help me?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Simone smiled. "Of course, that's what neighbors are for." After Simone left, promising to check on him later, Elliot sat in silence for a long time. Then, with deliberate movements, he retrieved his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in years. Sarah. His finger hovered over her number. Would she even remember him? Would she care that he'd essentially disappeared from her life without explanation? There was only one way to find out. He pressed call before he could talk himself out of it. 3 rings, 4, then a click. "Hello?" A familiar voice, but with an edge of confusion. She probably didn't recognize his number. "Sarah? It's Elliot. Elliot Graves." A pause. "Elliot. Wow, it's been a while." 6 years, he said, the timeline suddenly clear in his mind. "Listen, I know this is out of the blue, but I was wondering if you might have time to meet up. There's something I need to ask you." "So you about?" Another pause, longer this time. "Sure, I guess. When were you thinking?" "Today, if possible. It's, important." They arranged to meet at a cafe downtown in 2 hours. After hanging up, Elliot felt simultaneously terrified and liberated. He was stepping outside the boundaries he'd drawn around his life, and it felt like standing at the edge of a precipice. But before meeting Sarah, there was something else he needed to do. He went to his workspace and opened his design software. Instead of working on client projects, he began a new personal file. In it, he created a detailed timeline of his life. Over the past 6 years, annotated with the photographs he'd found and notes about his gradually contracting existence. When laid out visually, the pattern was unmistakable. 6 years ago, something had changed. His life had begun to fold in on itself, like origami gradually compressing into a smaller and smaller form. But what had triggered it? The cafe where Elliot had arranged to meet. Sarah was busy with the afternoon crowd. He arrived early, securing a small table near the back, away from the windows. As he waited, he felt increasingly out of place among the chattering customers, many of whom appeared to be friends catching up or colleagues discussing projects. When had he last sat in a public place simply to enjoy the company of another person? He spotted Sarah immediately when she entered. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, with strands of grey at the temples that hadn't been there before. But her movements were the same. The way she scanned the room with quick, observant eyes, the slight lift of her chin when she spotted him. "Elliot," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "You look exactly the same, actually." "You look good," he replied, meaning it. "Thanks for meeting me on such short notice." "I'll admit I was curious. It's not every day an ex-boyfriend calls out of the blue after 6 years of radio silence." There was no bitterness in her tone, just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement of their history. Elliot appreciated that about Sarah. Her directness had been one of the things that had drawn him to her in the first place. "I wanted to ask you about how we ended," Elliot said, deciding to match her directness. "I know this sounds strange, but I've been having trouble remembering the details." Sarah frowned slightly. "Having trouble remembering? Elliot, are you okay?" "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Some strange things have been happening, and I'm trying to piece together parts of my past that seem fuzzy." Sarah studied him for a moment, then signaled to a passing server for coffee. Once they had both ordered, she turned back to him. "We didn't really end in any dramatic way," she said. "You just withdrew, started canceling plans, working more hours. When we did see each other, you seemed distant, preoccupied. Eventually, I stopped pushing, and you seemed relieved." She paused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "The last time we spoke was at Lena's birthday dinner. You left early, said you had a deadline. I texted you a few times after that, but your responses got shorter and less frequent. Finally, I got the message and stopped reaching out." Elliot tried to recall the birthday dinner she mentioned. Lena, Sarah's friend from college, a restaurant with exposed brick walls, the constant feeling that he needed to be somewhere else, working on something important. But the details were hazy, like a dream half remembered upon waking. Was there anything specific that happened before I started pulling away? Any event or conversation that might have triggered the change? Sarah considered this. "Nothing dramatic comes to mind. Though," she hesitated, "there was that weird project you were obsessed with. The one for that tech startup, what was it called? Something about memory or archives." "Mnemosine," Elliot said automatically, the name surfacing from some hidden corner of his mind. "The Digital Memory Bank Project." "That's it," Sarah nodded. "You were designing their user interface, right? You were so excited about it initially, talked about it being revolutionary. But then something changed. You got more secretive, stressed, started working odd hours. That's when you began pulling away from everything. Not just me, but your friends, your hobbies, everything." Elliot felt a chill run through him. Mnemosine, a project he'd been so invested in that it had consumed him, and yet he'd barely thought about it in years. How was that possible? It was as if parts of his memory had been selectively dimmed, like lights turned down in rooms no longer in use. "Do you remember what happened with the project?" he asked. "It fell apart somehow. You were upset about it, but you wouldn't tell me the details. Said it was all covered by NDAs. Sarah tilted her head, studying him. "Elliot, seriously, what's going on? You're scaring me a little." "I'm trying to figure that out," he said honestly. I think I've been sleepwalking through my life for years, and I'm just now waking up." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. "Well, that would explain why you look exactly the same as you did 6 years ago, right down to that little scar on your eyebrow." She pointed to the thin white line above his right eye. "Most people change at least a little in 6 years." Something about her observation disturbed Elliot deeply, but he couldn't put his finger on why. They talked for another hour, Sarah filling in more details about the time before his great withdrawal from life. She mentioned friends he'd forgotten, places they'd visited together, plans they'd made for the future. With each memory she shared, Elliot felt both more connected to his past self and more estranged from his current existence. As they were saying goodbye outside the cafe, Sarah paused. "There was one other weird thing. Right before we lost touch, you kept talking about time not working right. Said days were repeating or something like that." She smiled uncomfortably. "I thought it was just stress or too much caffeine. But you were really upset about it." Elliot froze. "I said days were repeating?" "Something like that. You kept notes on it. Had this elaborate system of marking things to see if they changed overnight." She shrugged. "Like I said, I figured it was just stress." They parted with an awkward hug and mutual promises to stay in touch. promises they both knew might not be kept. As Elliot watched Sarah walk away, he felt like he was watching a connection to his real self disappearing around the corner. Back in his apartment, Elliot went straight to his computer and searched his files for anything related to Mnemosyne. Nothing came up in his work folders or email archives. It was as if the project had never existed. Next, he tried searching online. There were references to the Greek goddess Mnemosyne, mother of the muses and personification of memory. But nothing about a tech startup or digital memory project. He was about to give up when he remembered his external backup drive. He kept it in a fireproof safe in his closet, along with his passport and other important documents. He rarely accessed it. It was mainly a precaution against catastrophic data loss. The drive contained backups going back 7 years. Elliot connected it to his computer and began searching through the oldest folders. And there it was, a directory labeled Mnemosyne UI Design from exactly 6 years and 2 months ago. The folder contained dozens of files, wireframes, user flow diagrams, interface mockups. Elliot opened them one by one, memories flooding back as he viewed his own work. The project had been ambitious, a system for digitally archiving and organizing personal memories. Users would upload photos, videos, journal entries, even sensory data from wearable devices. The system would then create a navigable timeline of their lives, with AI assistance to identify patterns, connections, and significant moments. One document caught his eye, a text file simply titled "Warning." He opened it to find a message written by himself. "If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. The Mnemosyne system has side effects we didn't anticipate. It doesn't just store memories, it can alter how they're experienced. Time distortion, reality slippage. Signs include repetition of objects or events, notes appearing in unexpected places, chronological inconsistencies. If these occur, check the fail-safe protocols. Do not trust what you remember." Elliot stared at the screen, a creeping horror spreading through him. Below this message was a series of code strings and access protocols, followed by one final line. "Sugar jar vax anchor. Point. If moved, system destabilizes." He was still trying to process this information when his phone buzzed with a text from Simone. "Check your kitchen, now." Elliot rushed to the kitchen, heart pounding. The sugar jar was there, in its usual spot. But now there was something inside it, visible through the glass. A small black device, roughly the size of a USB drive. His phone buzzed again. "Don't touch it. Coming over." Minutes later, Simone was at his door. She entered without greeting, moving directly to the kitchen with surprising speed despite her cane. "When did that appear?" she asked, pointing to the device in the jar. "Just now, I think. It wasn't there this morning." Simone pulled out a chair and sat heavily at the kitchen table. "Elliot, I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but given what you've already experienced, I'm hoping you'll keep an open mind." Elliot sat across from her, bracing himself. "I work for Mnemosyne," Simone said flatly. "Not as a copy editor. That's my cover. I'm part of the emergency response team. We monitor for system anomalies and intervene when necessary." "Mnemosyne is real," Elliot whispered. "I just found my old design files. I had almost completely forgotten about it." "It's real," Simone confirmed. "And you were more than just a UI designer. You were one of the core architects. You helped develop the neural interface that allows the system to sync with human memory patterns. But something went wrong during testing." "What happened?" Simone sighed. "You volunteered as a test subject, against protocol, I might add. You were convinced the system needed a designer's perspective from the inside. But there was a cascade failure. Your memory anchor points destabilized. You became trapped in a temporal loop, experiencing the same patterns over and over while believing each day was unique." "That's not possible," Elliot protested. "I remember years passing, different projects, different seasons." "Memory is malleable," Simone said gently, "especially when interfaced with a system designed to reorganize it. You've been experiencing what we call subjective time, while objectively you've been in a loop of approximately 3 days, repeating with minor variations for the past 6 years. 3 days, Elliot echoed, remembering the notes. 3 identical notes, appearing on 3 consecutive mornings. "We've been trying to reach you," Simone continued. "The notes were our first successful breakthrough. We found that simple physical disruptions to your environment could sometimes penetrate the loop. The message was deliberate. It's not where you left it was meant to make you question your surroundings, to create a cognitive dissonance strong enough to crack the pattern. But why do I remember years of my life, different projects, changing seasons? Your mind constructed a coherent narrative to make sense of the loop. When the same 3 days repeat hundreds of times, with only minor variations, the consciousness seeks patterns and creates a timeline that feels continuous. But if you look closely at your memories, you'll find they lack specific details. They're generalizations, not distinct events." Elliot thought about his life over the past years, the sameness of his days, the vague sense of time passing without concrete memories to anchor it, the way his apartment never seemed to change, the way he never updated his wardrobe or rearranged his furniture. "The device in the sugar jar," he said, looking at it. "What is it?" "An extraction key," Simone explained. "It can disconnect you from the system and return you to objective time. But it has to be your choice, and you have to be conscious of the situation for it to work. That's why we've been trying to wake you up gradually. And if I use it, what happens then? You return to real time, to the world as it actually exists now, not the constructed reality you've been living in." "And what is that reality? What's happened in the real world while I've been stuck?" Simone hesitated. "Mnemosyne was shut down after your accident. The technology was deemed too dangerous. Most of the team moved on to other projects. Some are still working on ways to help you, and the other affected test subjects." "Other test subjects? There are others like me?" "3 others. You're the first we've been able to reach effectively." She leaned forward. "Elliot, I know this is overwhelming, but you need to make a decision. The extraction window is limited. Once the key appears, we have about 12 hours before the system recalibrates. And the loop strengthens again." Elliot stared at the sugar jar, at the small black device nestled inside like a technological seed. Could he trust Simone? Could he trust his own memories or perceptions anymore? "If what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "then my entire life for the past 6 years has been... what? An illusion? A computer simulation?" "Not exactly," Simone said. "You've been physically present in the world. Your body has been here going through motions, but your consciousness has been partially interfaced with Mnemosyne, experiencing a different temporal reality." "And Sarah? Our conversation today, was that real?" "Yes, that was a breakthrough. When you broke your routine and contacted someone from before the loop, it strengthened your connection to objective reality. It's why the extraction key appeared now." Elliot felt dizzy with the implications. If Simone was telling the truth, then he'd lost 6 years of his life to a technological accident. But if she was lying or delusional, then using the extraction key might cause real harm. Yet the evidence was compelling. The notes, the webcam footage dated from the future, his own warning message about time distortion and reality slippage, the inexplicable appearance and disappearance of objects. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "How does it work?" "You take the device from the jar," Simone explained. "Press it against your temple for 5 seconds. The system will recognize your neural signature and initiate the disconnection protocol." "Will it hurt?" "There may be some disorientation, possibly nausea. Your brain will need to readjust to processing time linearly." Elliot stood up and approached the sugar jar. He placed his hand on the lid but didn't open it yet. "If I do this," he said, turning back to Simone, "what happens to this apartment, this life I've been living?" "It continues to exist as data in the system, but you won't be experiencing it anymore." She hesitated, then added, "Think of it as waking from a dream. The dream landscape doesn't cease to exist just because you're no longer dreaming it. It remains in your memory, but you're no longer immersed in it." Elliot took a deep breath and removed the lid from the sugar jar. The black device sat among the white sugar crystals, its surface unmarked except for a small blue LED that pulsed slowly. With trembling fingers, he picked it up. It was warm to the touch, vibrating almost imperceptibly. "Are you ready?" Simone asked. "No," Elliot admitted. "But I don't think I ever will be." He raised the device to his temple. In that moment, he thought of the note in his medicine cabinet. "You are not where you left yourself." Perhaps it wasn't a warning, but an invitation, a call to return. He pressed the device against his skin and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. The world seemed to fold in on itself, colors bleeding into each other, sounds stretching and compressing simultaneously. Elliot felt like he was being pulled in multiple directions at once, his consciousness fragmenting and reassembling in rapid succession. Then, darkness. When Elliot opened his eyes, he was lying in a hospital bed. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed. Overhead, his mouth was dry, his limbs heavy with the weight of disuse. A monitor beeped steadily beside him. A doctor stood at the foot of his bed, making notes on a tablet. She looked up and noticed he was awake. "Mr. Graves," she said, her voice professionally warm. "Welcome back. You've been away for quite some time." Elliot tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. The doctor offered him water through a straw. After a few sips, he managed to croak out a question. "How long?" 6 years, 2 months, and 14 days, she replied. "The longest of any of the Mnemosyne subjects. We were beginning to think you might never disconnect." Slowly, painfully, reality reasserted itself. This was the world. The actual world. The hospital room with its antiseptic smell and mechanical hums. His body, thinner than he remembered, muscles atrophied from years of minimal use, despite the physical therapy he'd apparently received. And his memories, 2 sets now overlapping and contradicting. The loop of endlessly repeating days, constructed by his mind to maintain sanity within the system, and before that his real life, ambitious, connected, engaged with the world. Simone appeared in the doorway, not using a cane, he noticed. She smiled at him, relief evident in her expression. "It worked," she said simply. "It worked," Elliot agreed, his voice growing stronger. "I'm back." Outside his hospital window, Portland's skyline glittered in the evening light. The city looked different. New buildings, different lights. 6 years of change he'd missed while trapped in 3 endlessly recycling days. But he was here now, present, ready to rebuild the life he'd left behind. As he drifted back to sleep, a final thought crossed his mind. How strange that after years of leaving notes for himself, the message that finally broke through was the simplest truth of all. He had not been where he left himself, but now finally he was home. If this story kept you watching until now, leave a like and subscribe. The next one might be waiting for you right around the corner. And there's more, waiting just a click away. Maybe it will explain what was missing here, or maybe it will only make things worse.